Hello, and you're very welcome to episode 54 of The Fifth Court, a podcast on legal affairs presented by myself, Peter Leonard, barrister.
And myself, Mark Tottenham, barrister and editor of Decisis.ie Law Reports.
Mark, good to see you as always. And last week, you will recall, we had a really enjoyable interview with solicitor Valerie Peart, who gave us a great insight into the family firm Pearts, which is the doyen of town agents.
Yeah,
every solicitor's firm in Ireland and every legal person will know about Pearts.
Absolutely, carrying the weight of generations on her shoulders and really interesting.
And generations it is, because I think the firm goes back to the late 19th century.
Absolutely.
No, great interview and great response to that. Well, today, Mark, we're talking about barristers, and in particular, barristers starting out the devils. So non-legal people listening to this, when you start out as a barrister, you devil for your first year with an established barrister. And joining us in studio, we're going to have two colleagues, Sarah Reid and Aran Grealish, who have just published the third edition of the Devil's Handbook. Oh, if that was available when I was starting out, Mark.
Yeah, certainly. They address a lot of the mistakes that a lot of us make very early on.
I could have been on the right path. I was going to say a lot earlier, but just even on the right path would be fine, to tell you the truth.
Could be quite useful now, indeed.
Right. Okay, but first, before we get into that, we're going to have three cases from Decisis. So the first one tonight is we're going to start with two, actually, in a row. These are two Supreme Court cases concerning appeals from the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal. In the first, a solicitor took over another firm. He was then subject to disciplinary proceedings in 1999 concerning the failure of the other firm to file accounts. How is the appeal going before the courts?
Well, as you say, it's over 20 years and this appeal is still there.
I'm thinking of Prince here.
Exactly, yeah. So what happened, as you said, he took over another firm and then found that the owner of the previous firm had failed to file certain accounts, but because he had taken it over, he became responsible for them. And was disciplined. And so he was found guilty of misconduct in 1999 and by all accounts decided that that was a perverse decision, but didn't appeal it. Then, moving on a few years, he was struck off, not solely for that reason as far as I can tell, but certainly it was cited when he was struck off the role of solicitors. And he then brought other litigation against the Law Society. In the course of the other litigation, it turned out that the owner of the previous firm had written a letter to the Law Society accepting responsibility for not having filed the accounts. In the other litigation, a former registrar of the Law Society said he shouldn't have been disciplined for failing to file the accounts. And so he then applied for an extension of time to appeal the 1999 ruling. That was refused in the Court of Appeal and it came before the Supreme Court. And they accepted that he had a very good case for turning over this 1999 ruling.
Okay.
However, because he didn't appeal it in the original time, they wouldn't extend time for him to appeal it.
Wow. So this goes way back to the last millennium. Wow.
Exactly,
okay.
Yeah,
all right. Yeah. And you have another one from me from the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal. And this was a Supreme Court decision, and it was to do with a finding that there was no prima facie case made against a firm of solicitors. Again, they were in disciplinary bother. The appeal was out of time. You love these out of time appeals, Mark. And the High Court determined that it did not have the power to extend time.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well, it should be said these two decisions were handed down at the same time, so this isn't entirely a coincidence.
The great issue of our time, extending time. Okay,
but the curious thing here, and this is important for our solicitor listeners, what happened here was the appeal was by the person who'd made the complaint. So finding of misconduct in the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal is like a criminal finding. I mean, the consequences are quite serious, but the appeal here was by the person who had made the complaint because the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal simply said there's nothing to see here. And the appeal was brought out of time. And because the legislation concerning appeals does not specifically allow the High Court to extend time, the High Court said, if it's out of time, it's out of our hands. We can't extend time. The Supreme Court said no, that they do have the power, that the High Court of its nature, because it has full original jurisdiction, where it can extend time. So it was remitted.
Okay, all right. And I should say that that's the case of Kerwin versus O'Leary, and it's a decision of Mr. Justice Murray in the Supreme Court. Okay, and finally tonight, in the third case, a deceased had named his daughters as executors of his will. However, the deceased son applied to the court to have an independent person appointed as administrator of the estate. So nothing like an old family row. We love a family row on this show.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, As very often happens in these cases, there's a dispute among family members, and the deceased had, as you said, appointed his daughters as the executors of the will. The son clearly, had his reasons for not wanting the sisters to be executrices, as I think the official word is. But he wasn't able to show that there was any misconduct or any mishandling of the estate, and the most he could say was there was a delay in the administration, and the courts very much fall in favour of the person chosen by the deceased. So unless you can actually show misconduct or a conflict of interest or something along those lines, they won't remove an executor.
And we hope that family can put their difficulties behind them and move on after the court proceedings. Okay, Mark, thank you for that. And that is the case, I should say, of In Re Casey, deceased, and it's a High Court decision of Ms. Justice Stack. Okay, back shortly with colleagues Sarah Reid and Aran Grealish.
Silence in the Fifth Court.
I'm delighted to be joined in the studio today by Sarah Reid and Aran Grealish, who are colleagues of mine and Peter's, indeed, at the Law Library. Sarah Reid was called to the bar in 2008, and Aran is a more recent recruit, having been called to the bar in 2022. But they're here today because they have just published the third edition of a book called The Devil's Handbook, which sounds much more exciting maybe to the non-lawyer than it does to the lawyer. Sarah published the first edition of this in 2010, along with colleague Sonia Donnelly. Sonia has now left the bar, and so Aran has stepped into her shoes. And I suppose also as a more recent devil has more of an insight into what things are like now compared with when the first edition was published. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely.
Sarah?
I'm an old hack at this stage, so I needed new blood.
Not as old as myself, if we did ask yourself. So you published the first edition in 2010. What was it that made you think that such a publication was necessary?
Well, first off, I suppose I didn't realise I was writing a book. I was, throughout my first and second year, scribbling down notes in what I came to call a trauma journal, jokingly, but a collection of mistakes, mishaps, lessons hard learnt. And as had Sonia. And at the end of the year, we realised several of our friends all had trauma journals. And it wasn't necessarily a sense that this could be a book or it could be monetised. It was just a thing we had. And as colleagues who might have taken some time out and then came to the bar, we said we could give this to them almost as we're senior barristers now in our second year. You could have these notes and our scribblings. And Sonia went, or how about we publish it? So it just kind of came out of what were just initial musings, realising this actually is good content and could be a gift, or again, Sonia clever went, or it could be an income stream. So that's where it started, and it has grown from there into, and that's where the handbook element of it as a guide. It wasn't written as such, but I think has become a guide.
And did you have to approach many publishers with the idea? Or was it snapped up?
Well, hardly snapped up. I wish there was such a thing as legal textbooks and being snapped up. There was no advance. We had to sell the idea to them, really. Went to Roundhall.
And it's Roundhall.
Yes, it was with Roundhall originally, and we did have to pitch it to them. But I think the idea made sense, and they were willing to give it a go because it is a small text. It's not a huge amount. So they took a bit of a punt on it. We were quite eager and said, look, it's already done. So they could see an advanced copy, if you like, or a sense of what it would be. But no, there wasn't a bidding war, if that's what you're asking.
Fair enough. And just going back to the idea of a trauma journal, can you give listeners some idea of something that you found particularly traumatic about being a
it's
first-year
too soon,
barrister?
Mark. It's too soon to talk about it still, 15 years later. I suppose it was actually, and I jokingly called it a trauma journal, but it was actually just, I suppose, embarrassments, things that felt really obvious once you'd made the mistake, but weren't obvious in the moment. And that was part of the frustration, because I think you finish in the King's Inns and you are at that point a barrister. You're done, out into the wild, and then, or the law library. And you walk through the doors of the law library and you are a barrister. And that sort of sense of, I have arrived. And you do need to feel that, and that needs to be your you put on that cloak going into court, and that ego helps you do the job that we do. Certainly in the early years, the belief that you are a barrister. Sorry, you are a barrister, but the belief that you are all the things a barrister is and should be. And then if you do make quite a simple mistake because somebody hadn't told you, or it's not immediately obvious, that kind of mistake really struck me to my core as to, oh God, I'm supposed to know this, or everyone knows this, and I'm now the idiot. Am I a good barrister? Am I a real barrister? So it was all of that sort of quite mental component So are there things that were traumatic? I mean, I struck out my own motion once because I hadn't asked which party I was for. Wait till second call. Oh, they're not here, judge. Put it second call. I was here. Oh, these silly things. And then having to go back into the judge and say, oh, in actual fact, a miscommunication arose, meaning I didn't ask my master who I was for. So struck out my own motion. There are many silly things like that. And so, yeah, it was the embarrassment that I just felt this doesn't need to happen. And if we can remove that, you can get back to being an actual barrister rather than the learning on the job bit.
And Aran, you have just come out of this traumatic experience, presumably having the benefit of the first and second edition of the Devil's Handbook. There was nothing traumatic about your first year at the bar.
Oh no, came fully formed, fully prepared. No, obviously I had a formative experience in my first year at the bar. I happened to pick up the second edition actually when I was during my undergrad, before I even got to the inns or anything. But I kind of instantly opened it and didn't really understand the things in it because I hadn't gone to the inns yet or anything. And then I slowly started to reference the book again and again. And then I got down to the bar and I'd be talking to my colleagues and I'd mention something like, oh, well, you shouldn't leave one barrister in the court just alone with the judge. You should stay there until the judge rises. And my friends, my colleagues in my year would be asking, where did you hear that? Where did you know that? And I didn't realize until we started writing the third edition that it was from the book.
Sure.
So there was a lot of things subconsciously that I didn't realize that I had gotten from the book. And it was great to be able to add elements to that as well.
And would there have been other people in the inns who would have had copies of it? I mean, was it a widely discussed tome, or were you ahead of the curve?
Well, I might have brought mine into the inns a few times when we were doing certain topics, but I kind of kept mine to myself. I'm not sure why, but then when
was the cheat sheet?
Yeah, it was my cheat sheet essentially, and I think I lent it to one or two people. But then when we started doing the third edition, I was surprised because so many people that I didn't realize were aware of the book then had mentioned that they had bought it or they'd read it or they were aware of it. So I didn't really realize until we released the third edition the effect that it had on people.
Okay. And so when it came to putting this third edition together, did you work together from the outset in the new edition?
Very much so. I was quite aware, I think you'd mentioned at the start there, I'm now 15 years in practice, so I am not fresh meat for the devil mindset or market or outlook. And so I needed somebody who did still have that sense of what is it now? And this, of course, is after COVID. A lot of things have changed, even since second edition, which was 2014. So the bar has changed. The way we work has changed. Even the way, and we'll probably talk about this later, the way the bar as a profession has moved into a business. It always was a business, but I think the sense of it, like the prevalence of LinkedIn, of is there a TikTok barrister? I hope not. But the sense that it's a different thing now than it was in 2008. So I was self-aware enough to realise there's other bits here that I can't see because I'm at a different stage in my practice. And I think I might reference this in the book as well. It had kind of fallen off my radar. I kind of felt like, what can I actually add to it? So it may have died a death, and the second edition, to the extent that it still applied, might have been relevant, and I was happy to leave it there. And it just through interacting with Aran in the library, and there's a motion where we kind of came into contact with each other, and just through that, he's just very enthusiastic and very encouraging. And I was like, you know what? Kind of lit a bit of a fire under me to go, maybe this is worth a revival. So from the early days, I was cognizant to take the book as it was and take out the things that had aged and hadn't aged well. By which I mean things have moved on. And if you say, this is what the list looks like today, the lists change. And we've seen after COVID. So I wanted to future-proof it. So my task was more to take out bits and future-proof it. And Aran was to add in more bits. So Aran, I don't know if you want to jump in with the bits that you kind of wanted to add, or you did end up adding to the book.
Yeah, I think one thing from me listening to my colleagues, and I think this is an issue that kind of comes up. It's the people when we start at the bar, our masters, and they're very learned, they know a lot of law. But the issue is because of their advanced stage in their career, they don't know what it's like to do the small things. And it's the small things that the new barristers are going to be doing. And that's what I heard from myself and my colleagues, what we needed the most. So the part of the book that we added that I'm most proud of is this section where we set out all of the terms. I know you love explaining terms on this show. So setting out every single term you'd be using.
The jargon of the business. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So set out all of those. So when you're asked to do it, you know what you're being told to do. You know the effect of it. And then actually going so far as saying, this is how you say the full phrase in court using all of these elements. Because that's for a first-year devil, the first few weeks, the first months, that's what they'll be doing. They'll be going into court and they'll be looking to get a very simple thing. But if they say it wrong, the wrong thing will happen, or the court will tell you that doesn't exist, and you'll get that embarrassing feeling that we've all had at some point in our career.
Or a solicitor will ask you, and this is the thing for me, I think it's important to, and this is not to slag off or take a swipe at anybody, but frequently as a young, eager junior barrister, you want to get the result your solicitor's asked you for. But you may be asked to can you just go in and get that order? And it's important to note that's not actually an order the court will give. Or maybe that solicitor hasn't been in that list for a while and they haven't come across the new unless orders. So the judge, and I saw it just even this week, the judge said, "Oh, do you mean X, Y, and Z?" And the blood draining from the devil's face, going, if you could let that stand, while they go and ring their solicitor and go, is this what you mean? So that, I think that list of, and I was a bit concerned it might be almost, what would you call it, like insulting or because it's quite basic. Costs in the cause means, costs reserved means. I was like, is this too simplistic and a little bit insulting? They are at very least one, if not two law degrees, and these are they're grown men and women. Is this insulting? But I think the feedback has been that's been the most thumbed page of the book is the references.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of that stuff wasn't taught in those terms when I was in the King's Inns, and I don't know if that's changed in the meantime.
It wasn't for me in 2008 either.
I had a great experience at the King's Inns. I really enjoyed it, but they can only cover so much, and I think that's something everyone comes into practice with. They don't know these small terms, unfortunately, but I'm happy that we've provided something that can help guide people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that certainly struck me over the last few years is, when I started deviling, everybody was in the main law library. Now, obviously, it was before the CCJ, but it was like a college library that everybody was there. You bumped into people. And for even pre-COVID, I would find myself thinking, where are the devils? Because the people around the main floor of the library largely were the personal injuries bar who were there 20 years ago. And I don't know if it's that, so many more people are working in the rooms in the distillery building, so many more people now in the criminal courts of justice. But the sort of experience of the whole profession more or less kind of mingling in the one place certainly doesn't seem to be there anymore. I mean, can I ask you, Aran? I mean, where are the devils? I mean, are a lot of people doing an awful lot of their work at home, attending motions online and not mingling with the rest of the profession?
Yeah, it seems so. And you know yourself, Mark, I particularly picked a very prominent spot amongst all those older personal injury barristers because I thought it would be very beneficial. But it seems a lot of people are in the research libraries and they're working from their master's offices. And I think a huge element of it is being part of the library, absorbing almost through osmosis, overhearing conversations, even like overhearing how cases are settled. And I think a huge amount of it is in sitting there, being in the law library. But there's a flip side element of it now. Obviously, things have changed post-COVID. Like every year of Devils will have a WhatsApp group. And there'll be a good few messages per day. What's the name of X judge's registrar? How do you do a motion in X? So I think there is a kind of lean, but the issue is it's limited to your 1 year. The idea about the law library is you could have someone who's been down 20, 30 years beside you, and you could also have someone who's been down 4 or 5 who might relate to you more.
Yeah. But do you still find that people are helpful? If you do turn to somebody and say, what am I supposed to do about this? That somebody will still tell you, assist you.
Incredibly helpful. My devil family, my masters, and even my devil siblings, so people who have deviled for my master before me, have been incredibly helpful. And I got into the habit early on of, even if I don't know a barrister beside me, if I'm standing in court, I just go introduce myself and ask them, is what I'm going to do correct? Or what's this judge position in relation to it? And I think it's an element of losing your shame at the start. Acknowledge that you've just started working here and you'll actually make friends that way. Everyone will be happy to help you. And I think that's the main strength of the bar and being a barrister.
Yeah. One of the themes in the book appears quite early on and throughout is the difficulty of women at the bar. Do you feel that position has improved in the time since you've been at the bar, or are things as difficult for women as they ever were?
A quick and easy answer. I think has always been hard and it is still hard. And I really would like to see more just structures or even conversations around how to take some of those obstacles out of it. And I do say, and I say it is a theme in the book. And it's funny, writing the 3rd edition now, so I'm 15 years in practice. I've had 2014, I hadn't had my kids at that stage, and even the 2nd edition. I am now looking at it through different eyes. And just on so many levels, there are. So I was 2008. Now, that is a point in time when the financial markets, literally we qualified in July, and I think the next month the government was like, that's it, we're in recession, IMF are coming in. So it wasn't a great time, looking back, in any event, to start any new job. But still, the attrition rate for women in my year, and that's not even that much, that it is significant. So it does frustrate me a lot, and what we can do about that. But
it does strike me that the attrition rate that you talk about, a lot of people, famously, stick it out for 3, 4, 5 years and eventually go, this isn't working for me. Yeah. And it seems to me that isn't exclusive to women at all.
Correct.
And a lot of the people who do well, broadly speaking, are either the super bright ones who had scholarships all the way through and are picked out as sort of bright from an early stage, or the people who have, should we say, good connections or are very good at sort of working the system. It seems to me that at the sort of the devil level, the obstacles are probably similar enough for men and women, but then you have the other issue that you're talking about for, once you have a family, that, the burden still very much falls in most families on the mothers. And it's very difficult to see how a self-employed profession like ours can properly adapt for that. Or can we?
I agree that up to a certain point, it's very difficult for everybody. And that is probably the 4, 5, 5th year mark where you go, what am I doing? Is this a practice? Is this a career? Is it viable? So that's for everybody, I think. But the people who stay after that, I think a new kind of bracket opens up for women who stay, who get through that bit, but then reach maybe 7 or 8 years and say, actually, I'd like a house. Actually, I'd like a family. Actually, the next stage, or maybe other things happen that they need to make provision for. And it's that piece where I think that's the attrition for women. So they've made it, and this is why I was so frustrated, they've made it through the tough bit, but then go, how does this work? How do I take maternity leave? How do I cater for school holidays? How do I do that? And so a significant conversation, I think, needs to be
had
around
school holidays, school pickups.
School pickups, the timing of it.
And
now,
it's not only for the mothers.
But that's what I mean. I think the parenting aspect, how do you parent at the bar? And for Alan Brady, a colleague, has been brilliant on this around starting conversations and sort of saying to the Bar Council, what can we do here? We need to do better for people whose children are young. And in fairness, he was very helpful kind of with suggesting stuff in the book. But he said, I want to, I've named and shamed him now, but removed his cloak of anonymity. But he had comments in the tips from colleagues about parenting and about the logistics and all the rest of it. He said, but I kind of wanted to be clear, this isn't a woman. I know it's anonymous, but this isn't just a women's issue. It's a parent issue. And he hit the nail on the head. It's a parent issue. So you just get to a stage in your life where you're like, how is this going to work? But the things like fee recovery. So the Bar Council has done stuff around fee recovery, which is a big thing. So if you can make it work, so somebody in your corner to recover fees that aren't being paid, if you can make it work through those things, which again is not just women or men, but they're the things that are maybe more likely to get you to be able to stay through it. But because if you leave at that point, that's when we're not seeing the women seniors at the same levels, because they're not there. That's why we're not seeing women judges. We are seeing more women judges being appointed, but the pool of selection being seniors, there isn't the same. They're just not there to be seniors.
I mean, I remember Marie Baker when she was on the commercial court saying that, in every other division of the High Court, you see a reasonable number of women barristers. And then the commercial court, you see far fewer. Yeah. And the explanation seemed to be that the commercial court more or less expects you to go off and work 24 hours a day, getting your papers ready. And that is just less of an option for people who have to go home and look after a family. And that is still in our society predominantly the mothers.
And it's frustrating because the bar actually is a wonderful... It has flexibility, or there's the potential for flexibility with the long vacations when the kids are off school, with the later start date for 10 o'clock. The court, there's the potential for flexibility to make it work, but there are those additional obstacles which are just creating the reality, lacking the reality of it.
And then another theme in the book, you use this phrase quite a lot, finding your tribe. Maybe, Aran, you can. What do you understand by that?
Well, I think it's in Sarah's part that she mentions it, the idea of finding your tribe. I suppose there's lots of members at the bar, and eventually you're going to find people that support you and you relate to more within that. And there's nothing wrong with that, having that support system. I'm obviously new to the bar, but for me, it's been my devil family. They've been my tribe, certainly, in that they've helped me a lot. So I think that's an important element of it. So I suppose, as opposed to trying to appeal to everyone, trying to get along, focus on who you relate to, who's there for you when you need them. And that's my understanding of finding your tribe.
So you're not talking about like a particular specialist bar area or anything like that. It's the people who you turn to for assistance and in turn you try to assist.
The way I feel is it's a more of a human level, finding out who you can trust and who you feel like you will help out anytime. And I suppose there's no issue with that. I know we don't have chambers in Ireland, but I think one of the reasons that we don't, some people will argue that we do need them, some people will argue we don't need them, but we have those relationships, the freedom to have relationships with other barristers. Yeah.
And you've, having spent your first year in Dublin, you then went down to Galway, and you're now in your second deviling year in Galway on circuit. And well, I suppose I should preface this by saying when I started on the Southeastern Circuit, I was one of effectively 3 devils starting in that year. And I think there's now, I don't know, 20 a year or something like that starting. And how many is starting in Galway this year?
I am the sole devil in Galway this year.
Really?
Yeah.
For the whole Western Circuit or just for Galway?
There's two colleagues have started in Mayo, so the other county in the Western Circuit, but they're more senior than I am, believe. I'm the sole barrister now.
So you're the baby of the Western Bar.
And the effect of that means essentially every Western Circuit dinner or Galway Circuit dinner or Galway High Court dinner, I'm the junior, so I have to organise it until someone else comes along. And it's not guaranteed next year.
Start peddling this book, Aaron, get people in the door.
I'm in the course of organising my second dinner and we're 2 months in already.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Is that unusual? So I'm curious, I think that's really interesting. And I worry about the future of the bar for various reasons. And I think we might touch on this later. Are there too many? But if you're one... And I wonder, I would have thought the way fees are or rent is in Dublin, people would be moving back and willing to go on circuit if they have that connection there.
Well, obviously, I'll be enough for a few years for Galway. I'll be able to go. But from my impression so far has been it's 1 or maybe 2 a year in Galway.
So you're finding your tribe in the city of the tribes.
In the city of the tribes, yeah. And it's amazing, like having grown up in Galway and lived my whole life in Galway. Now I'm suddenly seeing it from another perspective and meeting people I would have passed on the street every day. But now I have this unseen connection to them by both of us being members for the bar. And there is a very strong sense of collegiality in Galway. Yeah. Like even when I was up in Dublin in my first year deviling, I get calls from random Galway practitioners who I hadn't met yet. And they just knew I was a Galway man up in Dublin and was like, can you cover this for me? So there's a huge amount of that in Galway.
Yeah. I must say, when I started on circuit, I found it easier to understand how a judge managed a list because it was all in the same court. And I remember in Dublin running around and there'd be some court where they'd go straight into the list, some where they'd spend half an hour on consents first, some where they'd call over the list first. And it was sort of, it was a calmer experience. I mean, have you benefited from just seeing sort of one judge running one list for a few days?
Yeah, or even especially like, I think knowing the judges better, like in Galway, there's one core judge and one judge who visits. So knowing them better, knowing how they operate, and your colleagues being able to advise on that better. But I think another element of it is going from court to court is so much easier in like the Galway courthouse. Like you've no worries if you're upstairs in the county registrar and you have to do something in the court downstairs. It's a 2-second walk, and all of your colleagues will be there. So. That's another relaxing element of it. Even today, I was in one list and I was really wondering how I was going to get everything done in the other list I had stuff in as well.
It is a stress. Didn't you do a map recently? It was brilliant.
I have a copy of it. If you'd like, I'll give it to you. Yeah.
No, but it's exactly that point where you are thinking, and even still, I had something in court 25, and I was like, 20. Sorry, no, it was 26. And I was like, 24 and 25, I know them. And then I was like, it's 26 there somewhere. So, it doesn't matter how long you are. It's such a little like, it was got the Marauders map thing and then the like Harry Potter. Yeah. So that map there.
The numbering of the courts in Dublin is almost designed to make life difficult.
Some really annoyed civil servant who had a laugh.
Now that you've kindly mentioned it, Decisis does publish a map of all of the courts, which we could probably have negotiated the rights. The next edition of the Devil's Handbook.
We certainly looked into it.
We were half thinking because this was the sense of how to make this just the small little bits where you won't be focused on what are my arguments. If you're actually focused on, I've timed it, it's 30 seconds, time trials between the Master's Court and the County Registrar's Court. And you just don't. And would you recommend, do you think then, sorry, Mark.
No, right. Yeah, you can take over.
Do you think circuit Because I'm actually fascinated by how, and friends, I've always known and I thought circuit was its own little tribe, as you said. Do you think that then circuit is something that I thought circuit is a different job, it's a different profession? I know it's part of the profession. I thought circuit genuinely feels like a very different job. Do you think it's a much more enjoyable experience? Having seen the Dublin bit, except to Devil in Dublin, have you seen that and seen Galway? Or
I think I really liked the atmosphere in both. I really liked the Dublin atmosphere of the hustle and bustle of the law library, and then I liked the element of Galway as well. And I don't think I'll be criticised for saying this. Like in courts, like in the County Registrar's Court in Galway, it's much more casual, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. When you see the judge or the county registrar on a very regular basis. I'm not sure if you could do the same thing in Dublin if this is the first time a judge, to their knowledge, has seen you and you're. But I think one of the elements of and I'm still up in Dublin a lot, and I'm still in Galway a lot. Obviously, I've moved back there. But I think one of the elements of just being in Galway to me was I step outside the courthouse and I'm at home in the city. I think that was a major element of moving back home to Galway to me.
Something else then that you cover in the book is the bar as a business. And is that something that you feel is not properly addressed or has not traditionally been properly addressed in barrister training?
Oh, definitely. Again, I'm speaking, I suppose, in a vacuum context of I qualified in 2008, so would have come through the ins in 2007. I didn't feel like I appreciated it as a business. In fact, it was at a CPD this year, Mark, sitting there, and Judge Hyland was talking, and she said because that was earlier before the long vacation. We wrote this over the long vacation. But it actually, the reason the chapter emerged and with that title, The Bar is a Business, came from her talk. And because it struck me, I was sitting there and she said, I don't think maybe there's a fully sense that you finish the ins, but that's college and you're not in college and this is now your business. And I was sitting there and it actually dawned on me, it's like, I don't think I had actually made that break. I don't think I had made that break. In my head, it was sort of because you're studying and it's research, and I went into the bar, but even the law library, I think somewhere in my back,
for the first 3 or 4 years, it feels like you are still in college, and if you make any money, it's a kind of
bonus.
You're almost surprised.
Yeah, well, my husband said to me once, he was like, "So you love what you do?" I was like, "Yeah," and he's like, "And you willingly do it late into the evening?" I was like, "Yeah," and his weekends, like, "Yeah," and he's like, "But you don't really get paid." I was like, "No," he's like, "I think you've a hobby. I don't think you have a job there. I think you have a hobby." And it's that sense of you don't expect to get paid. So psychologically, I was just in this headspace of it's an extension of college. Whereas she was saying, no, it's a business. And look, I have an accountant. I am operating a business. But I don't think I just fully joined the dots until she said it, that it is a business and it needs to be a business. And she was talking about, and I just think it's a fantastic, and I think it's something all practitioners need to really think about. If we're a business, like any business, you'd audit and say what's working, what's not. Yeah. And that's also down to like redundancies. What do I need to cut from this to make me run more efficiently, my business run more efficiently? And it's self-awareness, which we're maybe not great at because I'm brilliant at everything. Because you need to tell yourself, you need to tell your clients, your solicitors, I'm brilliant at this. But the reality being, well, do you know what? And she, again, I think she was a very incredible practitioner, very diligent, very good. Brilliant judge as well. She's running that list like she's very good, very competent. But she said she hated settlements. She loved the law, she loved the research, she loved arguing it. But settlements, which was this sort of like horse trading, what about this? She goes, that just wasn't who she was. So she actually found them quite stressful going into it because it was the dynamics, it was the relationship, the personalities. And she goes, that's not what law is to me, she was saying. So she said, looking back, she wished she would have maybe looked into ways she could have worked on settlement, and this whole negotiation courses now. So that sense of like recognizing where is your business at its weakest and what could I do? So that's the business. But I was sitting in the talk going, this is really, really good. And again, it's difficult to sit and look at yourself and say, I could be better at this or better at that, when we always have to tell ourselves, I'm the best, So
and particularly because we're all working as self-employed individuals, and it's not like you're in a team where you kind of go, it's a settlement, now you deal with that bit because I'm better at the court stuff.
This is it. And that's maybe where partnerships or there could be some benefit to that. And that's why the tribe, they will tell you they're not competition at that point in time. They might be tomorrow when you're in court. Sure. But you have people who aren't your competition in that moment and can tell you, I do it this way. I think you're very good at this. Maybe so lean into that bit of it rather than the other. That's the kind of tribe bit of see who can support you, because we have to be our own champions. And that's hard because you do sometimes go, am I correct? Am I not? Have I a blind spot here? So yeah, being a business is recognizing what's working, what's not, what could work better. And yeah, I don't feel like I really appreciated it. I didn't understand it. Maybe your generation might be a bit better, like the LinkedIn stuff, just these small tools that are available.
I think for me, I came in with a different approach because we actually, I forget at which point in the end, but they sat us down and they kind of said to us very sternly, this isn't college, this isn't university, you're not at school. And they actually told us not to refer to the King's Inns in those terms to anyone. And they said, there's the professional practice course. And then from there in my head, I was like, I'm a professional, this is my business. So then when I went to the bar, it actually kind of irked me a little bit when people wouldn't realize, especially when you're talking to your friends and family. I'm like, no, because people would be like, oh, and do you, what more exams do you have? And I'd be like, no, I'm finished. I'm a qualified barrister. I'm qualified from the get-go to take cases. So that was my mindset when I got in and how I wanted to act. So I think for me, it was very important to set up.
That is new though. I think the older thing of your surname or your connections meant you started in second gear. And if you didn't have the surname or the connections, you had to find a way to put yourself in that position. So maybe show yourself in other ways to be competent and bright. But it was a self-fulfilling, I need to be this and then the work will come. And that was definitely not the approach, the business bit you're describing. I'm delighted to see it because it is a professional course.
And of course, the other side, the important side of the business bit being you need to get your fee quotations out, you need to get your invoices, your fee notes out, and you need
and stay
to
on them and follow
and
them
you
up.
need to chase them and get paid, because if you don't, then it's just, as you say, a hobby.
Or even down to what used to be the fee notes was very much, what's that worth? Oh yeah, it's about this. And you'd kind of, literally almost like a one line. Whereas now, if you're to recover fees, they have to be itemised. Even like how many, this idea of solicitors' units. It's like, what's a unit? We just have a fee. So I think the idea of, and the business bit of it, the fee, and it's transparent, it's good, and it's as it should be. Clients shouldn't be able to see what it is, not just back of an envelope. That's about 250. Those days are gone. But I wasn't ever trained in it. So I think newer years, but it applies to older colleagues who have to now do fee notes, who are then going, what? Can I not just do the back of the envelope anymore?
I'm not sure if it's even something with everyone. So I thought it was very important in the book to say that you're now at the bar, you're now a barrister, you are a self-employed person. You are in charge of your own business and the product itself is you. So you need to come down with this effect of, I'm open for business, I'm ready to accept work. And I think one thing for me that I found that I was advised to do is get headed paper and set yourself up like you've been here for 10, 15 years. And especially like a lot of people, if people see you in court and you're good in court, that's great. But a lot of people don't see you when you're in court. And a good way to spread word about you is when you send something back to someone on paper to look like someone who's competent, who's got what they know, what they're doing, they've got it together and they're ready, essentially.
On that note, we have reached the end of our time. So we have the final question that I know you know, Aran. We always ask every one of our guests. Do either of you have a book or a film that you'd like to recommend to our listeners? Sarah, we'll start with you.
Oh, well, this is... See, I'm going to embarrass myself now. It's not necessarily a book or film, but there is a seminal show, which I actually found on YouTube and I'm going to watch again this Christmas. One of the reasons I became a lawyer, we have no connections in law in our family. I do recall very strongly as a young child coming home from school, I was minded by a lady who we had to rush home because she needed to watch Matlock. And so I spent every afternoon, I watched Matlock, and I'd forgotten about it until in The Simpsons one time, the nursing home, they were like, Matlock. And I started laughing. No one knew what it was. I was like, Matlock. So if you haven't, for your listeners, you haven't watched it, go on YouTube, watch Matlock.
That's a great recommendation.
Do you know who Matlock is, don't you? You see, do you know who it is, Aran?
No
Guys,
idea.
this Matlock was a Stetson cowboy lawyer in, was he Alabama? He wore a white Stetson. He was kind of Murder, She Wrote, but he was a lawyer. So he investigated, he prosecuted. And let's just say that coming to the bar with those expectations of what law looks like, I do own a Stetson, but I don't wear it in court. So I would say Matlock as a TV. There's always time.
And Aran?
For me, for a show, I watched a few of the Suits and the Better Call Sauls of it, and I just didn't find them relatable anyway. except for one show, which is Rumpole of the Bailey. And I have to say that I think one thing about it was I think 3 episodes into the first season, he passes Pack a brief midway because there was an ethical issue. And it was great to see something that's actually kind of semi-realistic.
Yeah.
And then per books, I think a lot of the best ones have already been mentioned on your show. But for devils who want to get good at advocacy, another good book, similar name to this one, which is difficult, is The Devil's Advocate by Ian Morley. That's a great one.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you both very much.
The Fifth Court will adjourn until next week.
And that's all from this edition of The Fifth Court. We hope you have enjoyed it. Can we say a huge thank you to our guests, colleagues Sarah Reid and Aran Grealish, for coming in and talking to us about their publication, The Devil's Handbook. Mark, that was one you handled alone. I'm afraid I got stuck in traffic.
Yeah, it was a very enjoyable discussion. We covered quite a wide range of topics, really.
I'm really disappointed to miss that. I thought it was brilliant. I was outside the window now listening in, and I thought it was really, really good. So our thanks to those. And obviously, anybody who's starting out in the legal profession, get this and learn the tricks. They work. They really do work. Okay, so before we go, can I say a huge thank you to our producer, Conal O'Moroyne, and to Lee Brennan of the Dublin South Podcast Studios for recording this show. So for me, Peter Leonard.
And myself, Mark Tottenham.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon in the Fifth Court.